Okay, let's just all take a moment to relax. Let's take a few deep breaths. One more. Okay, so why am I encouraging us all to breathe? The reason is because there continues to be widespread panic and confusion circulating within the MSTR community right now. And a lot of it, in fact, most of it, is unnecessary. And so I thought it was time I assembled a video providing some context and explaining what is going on with MSTR in the hope of easing your anxieties. Now, if you've been following me for any meaningful length of time on X, then you will know that I have been attempting through various posts to calibrate people's expectations of MSTR's performance for the best part of 2025. And so essentially, my goal is to synthesize all of my thoughts and distill them into a single video, which is this one. So without further ado, let's dive in. So the first thing we need to understand is what is strategy and why people invest in it. So at the highest level, at the most basic level, strategy is leveraged Bitcoin. That's it. Strategy leverages that to buy more Bitcoin. And so the main reason you invest in strategy is because you want to outperform Bitcoin. The only thing better than Bitcoin is more Bitcoin. Now, the second thing we need to understand is MNAV. What is MNAV? Generally speaking, for a pure play Bitcoin treasury company like Strategy, and by pure play, I mean that it is valued based solely on its Bitcoin strategy and not its underlying operating business. MNAV is a reflection of the market's expectation of future Bitcoin yield. Now, of course, it encompasses other factors too, but at a basic level, that's what MNAV is. The market's expectation of future Bitcoin yield. Now, remember, the Bitcoin yield is the difference in Bitcoin per share between any two periods. Now, Bitcoin yield comes with diminishing returns because each additional Bitcoin purchase contributes less to Bitcoin per share. And so the larger your Bitcoin stack, the harder it becomes to generate Bitcoin yield. And by extension, the harder it becomes to outperform Bitcoin, which is also why on a Bitcoin standard over a long enough time horizon, MNAV trends towards 1 because the maximum amount of Bitcoin you can own is 21 million. So with all this in mind, why is strategy trading where it is, currently around $330 at the time of recording, and why is it trading at such a low MNAV? Well, there are a few reasons. Firstly, Strategy is a totally different company in 2025 to the one it was in 2020. For context, the company, believe it or not, only introduced Bitcoin yield and Bitcoin per share in the July 2024 Q2 earnings call. And so it was only after that that they truly began optimizing for those metrics. And in my view, that is when Michael Saylor truly started to understand the opportunity that was in front of him, which is why in October of 2024, we saw Strategy announce the 21-21 plan, which became the catalyst for the parabolic run we saw in November of 2024, where MSTR went on to briefly hit an all-time high of $550. And so because people are comparing the MSTR this cycle to the MSTR of last cycle, when it traded, I believe, at over an MNAV of over 8, it is distorting their expectations. Again, Strategy is a totally different company today with a totally different set of dynamics. Secondly, we need to recognize that the Bitcoin treasury company industry or space is entirely new, which means that the market has been forced to learn and adapt in real time. And so, with Strategy being the first and by far the largest Bitcoin treasury company, it has gained a disproportionate amount of attention. And as a result, it has attracted a disproportionate amount of speculative capital along the way, while everyone has been trying to figure out how to value it. And so, in my opinion, the move that we saw in November of 2024 was an overcorrection to the upside, which, by the way, coincided with Bitcoin's parabolic run following Donald Trump's election win. And what we're now seeing is an overcorrection to the downside. Thirdly, as I mentioned at the beginning, Bitcoin treasury companies are currently valued based on how much Bitcoin yield they are expected to generate in the future. Now, at the time of recording, Strategy currently holds precisely 637,460 Bitcoin. That's over 3% of the total Bitcoin supply, by the way, which means that it is much, much harder to generate meaningful Bitcoin yield, which again is why you're seeing the MNAV compress. However, there is a caveat here. So there is another metric that Strategy have introduced, which is Bitcoin dollar gain. So Bitcoin dollar gain is defined as the dollar value of any new Bitcoin acquired within any period. And so Strategy, and I don't blame them, have been attempting to encourage the market to interpret Bitcoin dollar gain as earnings and to value the company based on how much earnings it is expected to generate in the future. Now, full disclosure, I personally dislike Bitcoin dollar gain as a valuation metric. I think framing it as earnings is misleading and disingenuous. Don't get me wrong, I understand why it has been introduced because it speaks the language of Wall Street. However, traditional earnings are final. Bitcoin dollar gain is not, because it is forever subject to the price of Bitcoin. And so, in my opinion, for Bitcoin dollar gain to be embraced by Wall Street, the market must collectively agree that Bitcoin is going up forever. Now, I remain very skeptical of that happening, especially in the short to medium term. However, I am also not attached to my beliefs. And so, if Wall Street does decide that it wants to embrace Bitcoin dollar gain as its primary valuation metric, then MSTR is probably undervalued by a factor of 5 to 10x. If not, then MSTR is undervalued by a factor of 1 to 2x, in my opinion. Now, if you're not content with the latter being the worst case scenario, then the stock is probably not for you. Now, moving on to my fourth point, which is the fact that the Strategy thesis right now revolves entirely around the success of its preferred products. Now, remember, Michael Saylor has explicitly stated that he wants Strategy to become the Amazon of the fixed income market. And so we're not talking about a small innovation here. We are talking about completely transforming global finance, which means that the process of generating awareness and educating the market that will ultimately drive demand for these products is going to take years, not months, which is why you need to have a long time horizon. Now, at present, the market is completely discounting the success of Strategy's preferred products. What it's not factoring in, however, is that the capital markets are desperate for yield right now. And so when, not if, but when they eventually wake up to Bitcoin, how do you think they are going to get that yield? Who do you think is going to be the entity that is offering Bitcoin-backed credit instruments at scale? The answer is obviously Strategy, but again, this is a 5 to 10 year and beyond story. So with all that said, if you're watching this right now, what should you do? There are 3 steps that you need to take. Firstly, you need to define your time horizon. In other words, how long do you intend on holding the stock for? Secondly, you need to estimate either, depending on your preferred metric, how much Bitcoin yield or how much Bitcoin dollar gain you expect strategy to generate during that period, and then calculate how much you expect MSTR to outperform Bitcoin based on those values. And then thirdly, you need to ask yourself whether you'd be satisfied with the level of outperformance that you have calculated. In other words, is the trade-off worth it, or would you be better off investing in either spot Bitcoin, another alternative Bitcoin treasury company, or a Bitcoin ETF? If you are satisfied with the level of outperformance that you have calculated, then MSTR is probably a good choice of investment for you. If you're not satisfied, then it is probably a bad investment for you. Now, I personally believe that MSTR will outperform Bitcoin by a minimum factor of 1 to 2x over the next 5-10 years, and potentially more if Bitcoin dollar gain becomes the primary metric by which it is valued. But again, I remain skeptical of that happening. So I know that might have been a lot to take in. Hopefully it all makes sense. Hopefully now you have more context around the recent performance of MSTR and the clarity needed to decide whether it is the right choice of investment for you. On that note, I'm going to wrap this video up. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or you can DM me if you're watching on X at Chris M. Millas. And until next time, as always, the best is yet to come.